4 agreements.
Interesting.
And let me just read the 4 agreements to you.
Awesome.
Be impeccable with your words. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions. Always do your best. Almost as if it came out of the Gemara. Right?
Yeah.
But that second one, don't take anything personally. It was as if somebody had just given me a secret.
The following is a conversation with Martin Salama. Martin is a Brooklyn native and grew up in a Sephardic Orthodox Jewish community in Brooklyn, New York. He has been a businessman for most of his life, but everything changed after the 2008 financial crisis when Martin lost everything. However, he worked hard to get back on his feet, and today, Martin is an advisor and a coach who helps companies unlock their full potential and people live with a mindset of abundance. Here's his story. Martin, Manishma, my man, appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
Sure, of course. Always love talking to someone, talking to business leaders, and we have a lot of really awesome information to discuss, and you've had a really cool journey so far and are up to a lot of really interesting stuff and helping a lot of people. But as I always like to start these shows, we all have a beginning to our journey. So if we could roll this back a bit, back to the youth days, growing up in Brooklyn, what do you remember from growing up in an Orthodox Sephardic community in Brooklyn?
So that's a great question. And it's not usually one I get asked right off the bat, but I love it. I really do love it.
Appreciate it.
I come, like you said, from an Orthodox Sephardic community, very close knit. And what I remember is that in our world, our mindset is that business is what is like the center of the world other than God. You have God, the religion, and then business, right? And you being in business and you being successful was the most important thing other than keeping kosher, being Shomer Shabbat, following the rules of Shabbat, Saturday, and all that. Other than that, it was being a businessman.
Got it. Interesting. So would you say that there was a heavy emphasis, other than kind of the main religious rules, there was a really big, heavy emphasis on, grooming the next generation to really take over those businesses, teaching them all the business lessons that, were passed down from generations?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was my mindset for most of my life. Growing up, my father had his own business. He was a manufacturer of tablecloths. At the time, they were plastic tablecloths with a flannel back. It was a big thing in the 60s and the 70s to have, that was a decent, most houses had these plastic flannel back tablecloths. The back had a material on it to keep it in place or whatever, so it wasn't sliding all over the place. But it was a plastic tablecloth. And he made a very successful business of that. And any day I had off from school, I was in work. I was working for my dad. And a part of that, I think, was because now looking back, I was ADHD. So my mother was figuring out, how could I get this kid out of my hair? Send him to work. And my father's factory was very close to our house. So I would work there. And I always saw myself as being groomed for the next thing, for the next to take over the business.
Got it. It's a really cool note, on a bit of a side note, specifically within kind of the Orthodox community. It seems like, every family is involved in some sort of different kind of business. And that's, perfect for the community, because whenever someone's having some kind of issue, there's a chance that someone's a call away or kind of a neighbor away from getting it solved. So that's
no question about it.
One of the benefits in those communities. But kind of thinking back, a lot of us have ADHD and a lot of us have things we deal with. But when you were working with your father, did you feel like it was more work, or it was more kind of learning and play? Or was it a combination of the two, you would say?
It was kind of a combination. I'd say a lot more work. My father was old school. You got to work. You got to no playing around. But there was other people would bring their kids in, especially in the summertime, that were around my age. And we'd find ways to get into trouble for sure. But it was a lot of learning as well. And I talk about the things that my father taught me, either directly or indirectly, watching him run the factory, which still stay to me till today.
Got it. So what are those things that you noticed about how he ran the show to make it keep going?
Yeah. So one of the ways was he would always get there before opening, do his paperwork. Let's say the doors to the factory opened up at 8:30. He'd be there between 7:30 and 8 o'clock, get his day ready, set himself up for the rest of the day. And then a little after 8:30, when everybody was settling into their rules into their rotations or whatever they were doing, their routines, I should say. He would walk around the entire factory and say good morning to everyone in the place.
That's awesome.
And each day he would stop by somebody else and chit chat with them for a few minutes. Hi, Mary. How's your husband? What's going on? Then the next day would be the woman next, every day. And I realized what he was doing there. He was showing them respect and that he cared about them, not just for being an employee, but for who they were.
You know, I think it's a beautiful note and awesome that your father really put in the extra effort to do that. And I think it's a broad metaphor for a lot of what we don't see going on in corporate America today specifically. A lot of times, I think especially at the junior level, a lot of people come into companies and a lot of these companies just see them as, cheap labor or cost center. And we really don't get that, traditional vibe back in the day when obviously there was an emphasis on doing your job, but people felt a little more appreciated. And, while everyone hopefully can have their dream job, at some point they're probably working, in something just to get by. I think even when they're in that kind of role, if they see someone, cares about them, they're a little more incentivized to kind of do well. And, even if they're not doing something they enjoy, it's much easier to do better in a job when, you really feel appreciated and you get that vibe. So really incredible that your father was able to do that. But back to kind of your story, after school, you went on working in a few businesses, but then everything changed, as we know, in the financial crisis. So what happened to you personally and professionally in 2008?
Yeah. So in 2008, my wife and I were working on a project for 5 years to build a multi-million-dollar health club and tennis center in the Jersey Shore, by the Central Jersey Shore. For anybody out there, right around exit 105.
Yep.
And it took us 5 years because when we started, my wife came to me in 2002, 2003, and I had just closed a business and I was thinking about what I wanted to do next. And she said, I started playing tennis and I could never find a place to find court time. There's not enough courts around here. Let's open up a tennis center. So I got to tell you, Daniel, I am not an athlete. I can't play. I basically can't play any sport. I'm just not. My kids are athletes, but I'm not. So I'm like, okay, part of me is like deep inside. I found out later I'm a people pleaser. So this is my wife wants. Okay, I'll make her happy. And we started looking into this idea of building a tennis center. So we go out and we get a feasibility study. And the guy says to us, yeah, you could build 7, 8 tennis courts around here without a problem and fill them up. He goes, but you're not going to be that successful financially. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, it doesn't sustain enough of a business for you to really do it. You could do it, but you're not going to make the kind of money that you could make. So what are you talking about? He goes, if you turn around and add a health club and other things to it, now you're talking about being successful. I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's take this and we start running with it. As a result, we have to go find the land. We have to go get the approvals. We have to do the architecture, the engineering and all that. We go to the city and they're like, yeah, this looks good. We're interested in it, but have you thought about the civil engineering? Civil engineering? Yeah. Traffic, parking, all these things. Oh, okay. Well, let's go do that. Now, if we had gotten approved in 2006 or even 2007, going to the bank to get money those days was like going to Costco and getting samples from the lady on the end of the aisles.
Wow, what a time.
They were handing them to you. They were handing you loans. I got my house refied twice in that 5-year period, and they've upped the value at every time. But luck would have it, it would be the summer of 2008 when I got finally all my city, state, and all the approvals. I go to the bank. I'm like, okay, I'm $3.5 million in now, waiting for this day. Let's go. They're like, yeah, we're not lending right now. I'm like,
what do you mean you're not lending?
What the hell? I've been going along this whole time for you guys telling me, wait till you get the thing. Well, business isn't what it used to be. I'm like, I can't hear that. What's going on? Well, things are slowing down. A month later, Bernie Madoff, subprime loans, the world falls apart like a house of cards. And you know where I am? I'm the joker on the bottom of the deck of cards, not laughing. Overnight, I was wiped out. That's it. I stopped paying my mortgage. stopped paying my car payments. About 2 months later, my son says, Dad, look outside. They were towing away my BMW.
It's crazy.
That's how bad it was.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason we didn't get thrown out of the house right away was because there was such a backup of more foreclosures in New Jersey
Mm-hmm.
that my house took them years till they finally foreclosed on it.
Mm-hmm.
But we lost everything, just like that.
That's insane. I can't imagine how people, go through these situations, and certainly, no fault of your own. We're not going to get into the whole, we'll say, financial irresponsibility of 2008, because that could be another episode, another podcast for sure.
Right.
But I always find it incredible how people can, have a lot going in terms of projects, business, and their life, and then ultimately, they end up losing it all, and then somehow, some way, bouncing back. And you certainly did with full force, which I commend you for. And we'll get into all the crux of that story. But after all that happened, when you really hit rock bottom, how did you reinvent yourself?
So it took me a while, Daniel. It took me about a year until I got out of my own depression. I was in a pity party. I was depressed. Looking back now, it was situational depression, obviously, because of what was going on. And I went through therapy. I even went through some coaching. And about a year later, I looked at myself. I said, okay, I got to reinvent myself. I've been a businessman my entire life. Do I want to continue being a businessman? And I really took some soul searching. And what I realized is that as much as I was a good businessman, I didn't love it.
Mm-hmm.
So what were the things that I like to do? Well, one of them was I was always involved in community events, community organizations. I was always a leader. And that I also got from my parents, because they were also very community-minded organizational leaders. So much so that I founded the first synagogue in Eatontown, New Jersey. Right? Which, when we started, getting 10 men on Shabbat was not an easy thing. I'd have to knock on the doors for them to come. Today, they have over 400 families, and they're expanding.
That's awesome. So they don't have an issue getting a minion, is what you're saying.
No problem getting a minion these days. And the shul is named after my brother who was killed in a bus crash when I was 5. It's called Sharei Tefillah B'nai Moshe. And Moshe is my brother's Hebrew name. So that's the legacy that I am very proud of, that I've left on the Jewish world, on that level, that this beautiful synagogue is thriving now. So how did I get that far? Because, I started the synagogue. I had a couple of other guys, and people would say, well, I can't do what you're doing, when we'd have some kind of event come up. I'm like, I'm not asking you to do what I'm doing. I'm asking you to just help a little bit. Come in. And what I started to realize is when I'd have these conversations, I was coaching them about them helping do what they could do best, showing them their potential. So I was like, maybe I should become a life coach. And that's what I decided to do. And I started researching, and I decided, okay, found a great school. I'm going to go there. But, just when you think you got everything figured out, life likes to throw you a couple of curveballs.
Yeah, I've had that happen to me in the last few days. I can mention that later, but sure. You were saying?
So it's about 2 or 3 months before I'm going to start my coach training. It's my 24th wedding anniversary. And my wife says, I'm done. I want a divorce.
Just out of the blue.
It wasn't totally out of the blue. I kind of knew it was coming, but you never want to admit that things are going to happen that way. Yep. You want to hope that something's going to change and that you can salvage it. We were married for 24 years at that point. I have to tell you, my emotions were everything you could imagine. Anger, frustration, sadness, loneliness, abandonment, everything. And my mindset was, why does everything keep happening to me? Right? And I think, as I looked at myself, I said, now what am I going to do? I said, you know what? I'm still going to go through life coach training. I think God tapped me on the shoulder and said, oh, you want to go through life coach training? Well, let's make sure you're really at rock bottom, so that when you're in there, you're ready for the changes. And what I've come to learn is, when I say things like, why does everything happen to me? This is my way of blaming everybody else for what's going on in my life, and me not taking any responsibility. Instead, now I say things happen through me. That's me taking responsibility for what's going on.
There's actually a saying, I think, in Judaism. In Hebrew, it's like "Lo lama aval ma." So you don't ask, why things happen. You ask, what do they mean? And then when you understand what they mean, you kind of go on the rebound. So that's a bit of a Jewish lesson
Exactly
for
right.
kind of the
Exactly
listeners out
right.
there.
So
So,
now I'm coming up to this training, this
mhm,
coach training, and they send me a list of books. They said,
mhm.
read a couple of the books on this list. And one of them was by a gentleman named Don Miguel Ruiz. It's called The Four Agreements. Did you ever hear that book?
Never know.
Okay. So this is the book here, The Four
Mhm.
Agreements.
Interesting.
And let me just read the four agreements to you.
Awesome.
Be impeccable with your words.
Mhm.
Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions. Always do your best. Almost as if it came out of the Gemara, right?
Yeah.
But that second one, don't take anything personally. It was as if somebody had just given me a secret that the whole world, I can even think of my father specifically, had been telling me my entire life. My father passed away in 2001. So this was years after he had passed. It's as if he had just told me a secret in this book that people like my father had been telling me my entire life.
Mhm.
But until that moment, I wasn't ready to hear it. And when I heard it, it's like that old saying, the master will appear when the student is ready. I was ready.
Mhm.
And when it hit me, I was like, well, that's what my problem has been. I take everything personally. And I went into that first weekend willing of coach training, willing to be open to understand what was going on. And they
Mhm.
said to me, you don't have to be who you think you have to be. You can be whoever you want to be. I was
Mhm.
like, wow, that's a lot. And I took it from there.
Got it. I mean, it's great to hear that you were really able to find your purpose through the hardship and, are able to go through that coaching through more of an open lens and really be present in the moment and try to understand, life happens through you, not at you, or
Right.
kind of, if I said that correctly.
Not to you.
But ultimately, not to, yeah, life doesn't happen to you, life happens for you. I think
Right.
that's the right way of saying it. So appreciate that
Yep.
there. But one of the things that you also came up with is the Warrior's Life Code. So what is that?
So yeah. So when I first finished my coach training, I had just gotten divorced. So I help people recover from the emotional pains of divorce. So I was
Hmm.
a divorce recovery coach. And after doing this for a few years and enjoying it, I started to realize that I was incorporating a lot of the things that I learned and was taking advantage of them and building my own life. And I realized one of the things that had happened as to why maybe my marriage didn't succeed, wasn't so great, was because I didn't like myself. How could I expect my wife to like me if I didn't like myself? So through coaching and all these other things that I was doing, reading better, eating better, doing all these things, I started to develop a mindset of that I liked myself and I loved myself.
Hmm.
And one day, as we talked about, I was ADHD. I was I was meditating for 10 minutes. Imagine an ADHD guy meditating. It doesn't work well.
Hmm.
But I even had the
Totally.
guy, the headspace, the guy guiding me through meditation. I had this download of information that I loved what I was doing in my life. And I wanted to show other people how to do it too. After I meditated, I wrote for 2 hours. And out of that came the acronym LIFE,
Hmm.
live incredibly full every day. And to me, it has a dual meaning. It means have a happy life and have a meaningful life.
Hmm.
A happy life, you could be happy without any meaning, right? Happy is kind of selfish, self love, self
Hmm.
care. But meaningful is selfless. And for me, it was having that both, having a life that I could be happy with myself while also giving meaning to the world.
Hmm.
So I created Life, Live Incredibly Full Every Day, and I put together my coaching program around that. Now, in the interim of this going on and me coming up with this, I started dating,
Hmm.
right? And when I was going out on these dates with these women, and that happened because a woman reached out to me in my community and said, now that you're divorced, are you ready to start dating?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but that's how it is in the community, in the Jewish community, especially if they see anyone is single, whether they're just first time or they're looking to kind of get remarried. People are always rushing to put people together. And on another slightly more side note, I think there's like a thing in Jewish law, if someone sets up three shidduchs, so three couples, it's like automatic heaven. So people might have
Automatic heaven. So
for sure.
yeah, so she calls me. I'm like, but Kelly, you're married. She goes, not me. She goes, I'm your matchmaker. I'm like, what is this, Fiddler on the Roof? She goes, no, we have an organization of women who match men and women up, whether they've gone through a divorce, whether they're single, as you said, Daniel. So I'm like, I don't know if I'm ready. We started talking and she goes, you are so ready. I've never met a man so well put together after his divorce. So I'd be dating. And I'd go out on these dates. And now that I understood who I was and who my values were, I was looking for a woman that had the same values. So I would basically interview them on the dates without them knowing they were being interviewed. I would have a conversation, try to get to know what their values were. And one day she calls me up. She goes, I've got this great woman. You've got to take her out. Well, tell me about it. She starts telling me about her. We're talking for 5 minutes. I go, I don't know anything about her. She goes, well, you know Ralph and Cookie? I'm like, yeah, Ralph's friends with my oldest sister, Linda, who's 10 years older than me. And Cookie's friend with my sister, Nancy, who's like 7, 8 years older than me. I go, yeah, I know them. It's their daughter. I'm like, it's their daughter? Well, how old is she? Well, she's 15 years younger than you. Well, if she wants to go out with me, I'm all in. And thank God I can say we've been married for almost 6 years.
Awesome. That's incredible.
Right. But why am I telling you that part of the story? Because now in 2020, something crazy happens in the world. Something called COVID.
What's that?
So there's this thing that came around that shut down the world. They said, don't worry, it's only going to be for like 2 or 3 weeks. So we all huddled up in our houses. Me, I went out every day. I put on the mask. I put on the gloves. I went shopping. I went out. I went for a walk. I couldn't stay in every day. But my wife came home from work. She was working out of her room. The kids came home from school. They were working out of their rooms. And after about 2 months, that was supposed to be 3 weeks, I tell my wife, let's go to the city. Let's drive to Manhattan. We'll wear our masks. We'll do whatever. So we drive. We take our kids and we drive to the city. Now, Daniel, you know Manhattan at all?
I used to live in Manhattan, actually, as a side note. I didn't mention that, but for 2 years. But I lived there late 2021 to kind of mid 2023. So
right.
Okay. Mid 2021 to mid 23. So I know Manhattan as we all know Manhattan, but you probably knew it as a bit of a ghost town back then.
Right, exactly. So imagine driving straight down Fifth Avenue and not missing a traffic light.
It's insane.
It's insane. I did that. We did that. There was no cars on the road. There was no people walking around. And I turned to Sarita, that's my wife, and I said, how is this possible? Where is everybody? What are they so worried about? And at that moment, I said, oh, they're worried. And I realized I wasn't, because the last 10, 12 years between coaching, going through 2008, my divorce, coaching, God had prepared me. Coaching had prepared me for anything. I was never going to be worried again in my life, because I knew how to deal with anything that was going to come up, which wasn't the old me. And I was a worrier. And I said, guys, I get it. I went on Facebook live stream and I said, I get it. I know why you're worried. So let me show you how to go from being a worrier with an O to a warrior with an A. And that's where the Warriors Life Code came.
Got it. I'm want to ask about that, but as a quick question, when you went down Fifth Avenue and there was no traffic lights, did you think to yourself, wow, New York is a lot smaller than I thought it was?
Yeah. And it's much faster to get through this town.
Yep. Crazy. I can't imagine.
It really isn't. For those people out there that have never been to Manhattan, it's much smaller than people think.
No, Manhattan is, back when I lived there, I think I've walked the city a few times. You could really get from, the subways, you can get anywhere to anywhere within a few minutes, but really to walk New York isn't that bad. I just think a lot of people might get overwhelmed by the amount of people, but it's only really like that in the middle of Manhattan, outside of, the kind of the east side, more close to the east side, the west side, the upper east side, upper west side, the financial district, all these random neighborhoods. It's much more neighborhoody walky. It's not always as crowded as it is in Midtown. So I have to add that. But on the note that
when you go to Brooklyn, it's even a whole different mindset.
Yeah, Brooklyn I remember living in Manhattan, I would go sometimes to kind of the boroughs, and then it's just crazy. You can go from like Manhattan to you just feel like you're in a regular neighborhood, right? Really, really close by. So that area is definitely one of the most interesting in the world for sure. And, people should visit if they haven't been. But On the note that you just mentioned, going from worrier to warrior, you actually wrote a book
Yep.
titled Warrior to Warrior: 7 Steps to Uncover the Warrior Within and Live incredibly full every day,
Right.
as you're so eloquently holding up. So what was the motivation into writing that, and what do you hope that readers take away after reading it?
So that's a great question, Daniel. So the motivation for writing it was over the last 12, 13 years of my building my coaching practice. What I realized was I was coming up with skills and techniques to help people shift their mindset from lack to abundance, from self-conscious to self-aware. And there's a huge difference between self-conscious and self-aware. And what I realized is that I was coming up with these systems, with these techniques that I was using with my clients, and they were having great success. So I was like, I think I need to put this down on paper.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I've got here can help anybody if they're open-minded and willing to do it. Because I had taken my course and made it into an online course.
Mm-hmm.
So I took that online course and made it into a book, and I actually even made a card deck as
That's
well.
cool.
Yeah.
Interesting. Do you think, on that note, those techniques, do you think that they only apply to people working, within a certain amount, within certain jobs, or do you think they're uniform to anyone going across struggles?
It's anybody. That's what's great about these, what I put together here. It doesn't matter what you do. If you take the first step of admitting that something's got to change, then you're ready. If you take that first step and say, okay, it's the old Einstein saying of the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting change.
Mm-hmm.
If you change your mindset to say, okay, instead of saying I can't, how can I? And admit that the things that weren't working will continue to not work and that you got to change, things will start happening.
Yep, for sure. And, on a more practical approach, you actually have a client story out with a kind lady named Roberta who ended up losing her job and turning it around. Can you speak a little bit about how you were able to help her out and kind of put her back on the path to where she had to be?
Absolutely. So Roberta was one of those people who saw that Facebook live stream.
Mm-hmm.
And we had known each other from before. She went to the same coaching training, but she really got knocked down by COVID. She lost her job. She had a 6+ figure job, and she thought she had it made. She had the job of the dream she dreamed she'd always have. She was making a good living. She lives in the Midwest, where making 6-figure income
A lot of money.
is a lot of money, and they could live a very happy life. Just like that, she lost it, and she was like in a daze and didn't know what to do next. So she reached out after she saw that Facebook live stream and said, "Can we talk?" It's like, absolutely. We get on a call. She tells me what's going on, and she says, "Okay, let's start working together." So beautiful. Started working one-on-one with her, and her willingness to say, I'm willing to change so that I can move forward. This is what I'm looking to do.
Mm-hmm.
And in a very short period of time, within a few months, she had gotten to the point where she didn't feel that lack, that desperation of what am I going to do now? And she felt like, okay, where can I go now? What could I do with myself? And she actually started her own coaching client, business coaching with a friend she knew in the Midwest.
Got it. Wow. It's awesome that you were able to help her out there and, ultimately kind of let her pivot. But on that note, do you think it's important to, as a coach, when you're looking to help people, that it goes both ways? People need to want to help themselves too.
Oh yeah, 100%. You could be the greatest coach in the world. If you have a client that's not willing to do the work, you're basically the worst coach in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And you could be the worst coach in the world. And if you have a client that's willing to do what's necessary, get out of their comfort zone, you are the best coach in the world because they're the ones that are doing the work. You're just there as the facilitator, as the one who's going to be their accountability partner to move forward.
It's really beautiful because I think a lot of times people are quick to blame or act very emotionally. They're like, "Oh, it's his fault. It's her fault," or whatever. None of us are perfect. I think looking back, a lot of times there's a million things maybe we would have done differently. But I think the most important thing is in a situation like that, it has to go both ways. The person facilitating has to do their best to try to advise someone, go the extra mile for them. But that other person also has to know, it's not a one-way relationship here. I also have to do my part. So
Yep.
definitely in alignment with you on there. Another thing that you mentioned earlier that I thought was really interesting, you said that you spent 15 years studying and refining techniques used to kind of transform micromanaging, really being emotional. And you described that as Martin 1.0. So after kind of going through those studies, now you're Martin 2.0.
Yeah.
What's the big difference between the two?
I'd say the biggest difference between the two of them has to do, I went from being somebody who reacted to everything to the point that I would overreact, almost like a nuclear reactor where I would leave fallout all over the place, to now I respond. And it's about taking a moment, recognizing what's going on, and responding instead of just like shoot first and ask questions later. Daniel, you know what happens when you shoot first and ask questions later?
You miss?
You're all dead.
Got it. Yeah.
You killed them all. How are you going to ask them questions?
Got it. That's a fair point. So what do you think are some specific like tactics or specific exercises people can do to really try to, be a little more, I want to say react, be a little more responsive, not just react right away.
So Daniel, you remember when you were in school and the firemen came to the class to teach about fire safety, right? And they said, boys and girls, there's 3 words I want to leave you with.
Stop, drop, and roll.
Stop, drop, and roll. So while I was going through this transformation, I realized that I needed to become something different than who I was. And I had to come up with a system that works for me. So as I was putting my book together and my course together, I was talking to my coach who was helping me with myself and my business. He says, well, how did you do it? I said, well, the fire guy who teaches you stop, drop, and roll. I said, I basically kind of took what he did and changed it to stop, think, and respond. So what I do is I tell people, if you're someone who reacts all the time, the next time you're in one of those situations, stop. Don't react. Then think about what's going on. What's happening right there? How are you taking this? Are you taking it personally? Is it about you? Maybe the other person's having a bad day. Maybe something's going on in their life and they're projecting it onto you. Or whatever. Or it could be about you personally, but do you have to take it personally? And then number 3 is respond instead of react. If you've stopped and you thought, and you could even say to them, if you're not sure what to answer at first, you could say, you know what? That's very interesting. They're like, what? You just kind of stop them in their track. And you go, I got to think about this a little bit. And you're giving yourself permission and you're asking the other one to give you permission to respond instead of react. If you're a reactor, they're going to go, this is weird. But hopefully they'll let you go through it and then you respond. So stop, think, and respond.
Yep. We're emotional beings and it's tough to always be objective, especially objective about our emotions. But I love that phrase because I think a lot of tactics, a lot of the most practical ways to think to improve are those things that you can immediately think of, when you're in those circumstances. So I definitely love the stop, think, and respond acronym and hope that we can all use that in the future as we try to improve. On another note, something that I think you do that's really interesting is you have a radio show. And just to touch upon this from before, but it's called Recovering from Divorce with life coach Martin Salama. From your time,
you did your research, man.
Yeah, look, I'm really fortunate on that note to have a lot of guests have told me that, and I've done my research, and I always tell them you don't build the best business podcast in the world by asking shitty questions. So I should put that on a shirt one day. But I really appreciate that. But as you're hosting that show, I'm sure you've heard of a lot of different situations. So I have to ask, what are the most important things you've learned about relationships hosting that show?
I have to say that the number one thing, the first one, and it's like 1 and 1A, number 1 is you've got to make sure you're communicating with the other person and that you're being sensitive to what they're saying. Don't just hear what they're saying. Listen to what they're saying. And again, respond. Don't think you understand. If you don't, ask to change. And the other part of that has to do with if you understand what your values are, when you're getting into relationships, especially romantic relationships or anything like that, if your values and the other person's values are not aligned, which is what I found out with my first wife as I went through coaching, is that our values were never aligned. And maybe we shouldn't have gotten married. But on that being said, we had many happy years. We were married for officially 25 years. I have 4 children with her and 8 grandchildren.
That's awesome.
We had many good years, Baruch Hashem, thank God. All right. But we were in a codependent relationship, and it had to do with our values never being aligned.
Got it. Interesting. So the big thing is you would advise when people are kind of dating, the main thing they align on is values, because those are really what are going to gear people forward.
Yep.
Got
and
it.
Especially when it comes to the Jewish community, there are so many different people on the spectrum of life.
That's so true.
Right. And if your religious values don't align closely with theirs, you're looking for issues later on. So, and you're going to say, oh, I'll change that person. You ain't changing them. They are who they are, unless they want to change for them, not for you.
For sure. On a slightly different note, as you're speaking to people and you speak to people who have been through divorce before, what advice do you give for them as they try to move forward and navigate, life and just maybe dating again?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for them, it's about first recognizing what in their first relationship, their first marriage, worked and what didn't work. Right? Who was I that showed up that made the marriage successful? And how did I show up that made it eventually fall apart? Now, I'm not saying you are fully to blame, because in most relationships, divorces, there is a certain amount of blame on both sides.
For sure.
I can say that was what it was in my case. We were both victims and we were both culprits to the demise of the marriage. That being said, I understood that I had to make sure not to marry the same woman in a different body. And I needed to become who I needed to become for me before I could go out there and find somebody who would fit what I was looking for value-wise.
Got it. So really, the first thing you said, align on values, and 2, when you're dating again, make sure who you're dating is, someone more aligned with what you're looking for. So
Right. I mean, like I said, when I started going out with Sarita, she was checking off all the boxes right away. And the next day. A month into it, I said to her, I got to tell you something, and I don't need to hear it from you, but I'm falling in love with you because I love who you are, and I love that you see me as I am and accept me who I am. And 2 weeks later, she told me she loved me too.
Got it. That's awesome. May we all strive to have that kind of a dating experience. But really great that you're able to help people out, especially going through a difficult circumstance. So, Martin, I definitely commend you for that. On another topic that I think is really interesting and kind of fun, and a really creative thing that I think we should all look for that creative outlet. But on your YouTube channel, a lot of the times you like to give advice while you're cooking. So, how did you come up with just that creative idea?
Oh, wow. So that actually came out of my divorce. So when I was married, I was living in New Jersey, down by the Jersey Shore. My community goes to the shore for the summertime. That's just who we are. We all migrate from Brooklyn down to the Deal Jersey Shore area for the summertime. Thousands of us, right? And over the years, hundreds of us have stayed in Jersey for the winter. And now it's a couple of thousand, but still way less than what's in Brooklyn. And I was one of those who ended up doing that. So after my divorce, I moved back to Brooklyn where my family was for their support system. And because I had no money, I moved into my mom's house. She was living with her husband. So it's not like I was living with my mother. I think I would have killed myself. But I did have the ability to live in my mom's house and have the support of my sisters and their children, and my children who were married by then, living in Brooklyn. But in the meantime, my ex is living in Deal. I'm living in Brooklyn. And my kids are coming to me every other weekend for Shabbat. And they're like, Dad, we don't always want to go to grandma or to your sisters for dinner Friday night. We just want to come and hang. So I said to them, well, if you guys are okay with me figuring out how to cook, because I had always cooked a little bit. My wife never let me because I was a slob. She didn't want to clean up the kitchen. I said, if you let me go through, and my ex-wife was an excellent cook. My mother, my sisters, excellent cooks. I said, if you're okay with me learning how to cook and you being my guinea pigs, then let's do it. As a result, it became an outlet for me. And it became cathartic for me to start cooking. And I fell in love with it. And what happens to be the woman I married is corporate. She likes to cook. She doesn't love it. And she works for JP Morgan. She leaves the house at 7. She comes home after 7. I work out of the house. I'm the cook. I'm the chef in the family. So one day I was talking to somebody about my coaching, and they said, you should do YouTube videos. I said, I can't talk for 10, 15 minutes on a subject just like that. They go, well, what do you like to do? I said, well, I like to cook. So they said, so cook and coach at the same time. I'm like, all right.
Talk about multitasking there, but those are really fun videos, and awesome that you're able to do that as a creative outlet. So, what's your favorite food or your favorite food to cook?
Well, that's a good question. I'd have to say it's part of the Middle Eastern culture, things like that. Things like chicken and spaghetti, which is a Sephardic dish has allspice and cumin and cinnamon and paprika, and it's really a good number there. There's a spinach quiche dish that I make. Another one called calzones, which is an Arabic version for calzones, little tiny raviolis. Anything. And one of the things I love to do, I found over the last few years, is smoke. I like smoking meat.
Smoking meat is good.
Yeah.
The flavor we get there is great, but awesome that, you're able to do that. And those do sound like some great dishes. Personally, I'm a big Moroccan fish fan, and, love that spicy food. So
all right.
Nice. We all have our food outlets, but, one of your YouTube videos is actually titled The Shocking Truth About Happiness. So I think we're all waiting to hear, what is the shocking truth about happiness?
So a friend of mine did a I can't, my mind's going blank, a TEDx, a TED Talk on happiness. He goes, the secret to happiness is happiness. That's the shocking truth about happiness. Nothing outside can make you be happy if you don't want to be happy. So it's about, the shocking truth is, it's up to you.
Got it.
Don't wait for someone else outside to make it happen for you. Don't wait for the stars to align for it to be happening. Start within yourself.
It reminds me of a lot of people are always asking, how do I start a business, or how do I do this, or how do I do that? And, the shocking answer is you just kind of do it. And
exactly.
I think it's one of those things. It's a tough thing to answer because it's less a tactical answer. It's more a feeling. And I think a lot of times it's hard to communicate that feeling, but the most tactical thing I would say is just, you just do it, and then you just have a feeling of learning. And that's what I've learned, at least through podcasting and kind of, growing in the media space. So will be interesting to see how that plays out. But I love that advice. Love that advice for sure. But speaking on the business front, you actually have something on LinkedIn that I thought was really interesting in your tagline: generate $1 million in new sales with 2 years guaranteed. Now, that sounds like an awesome promise. So I have to ask, what's up with that?
So, yeah, this is a new program I just got into doing recently. And I use something that's kind of like thinking out of the box, which, you know what, you got to do. And I use something called a risk reversal strategy. I've been involved. And what got me to do this was, over the last 10, 12 years, I have invested in programs to help me become how to figure out to make my business a multi-million-dollar coaching business. And very often I pay up front the whole thing. And then halfway through it, something would happen. I was like, well, I can't do this. And I don't know how to do that. And how am I going to do that? And when I would go back to the sources, they were like, well, here's some information, but basically you've got to figure it out on your own. And I was like, oh, great. They've got my money, and now there's nothing I can do about this. And I started thinking about, how can I help other people move forward in their coaching business? What they need to know is, there's 3 things. What gets you to be a 6-figure business? It's systems. What gets you to become $1 million business? It's a mindset. But what gets you to go over $1 million? Scalability. So I put together a program that shows you the system. I bring in my coaching as well to help your mindset, shift your mindset. And then I show you how to become scalable.
Mm-hmm.
And then I use the risk reversal strategy by saying, I'm only going to charge you from the beginning. Your investment is only going to be 12.5% of what the entire investment of my program is.
Mm-hmm.
Pay me 12.5% upfront. And then you don't pay me again until you start to make money.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, oh, I've made my first sale, give me money. When you've hit a certain milestone that is basically saying, okay, I've now made X amount of dollars, and you make the next 12.5%, it's 2-to-1 return on investment.
Mm-hmm.
You've made double of what the investment is when you put 25%. Then I said, great, let's keep going. Let's keep building using my systems, using my mindset help and the scalability. And when you get to the next level, that you're 5 times
Mm-hmm.
when you put in the 50%, the next 25%. So now you've put in 50% and you've made 5x return on your investment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how much do you want to get to 10x?
Got it. Okay. So I like that model because it's, it's more people are paying you and it's not a financial burden to pay, essentially.
Exactly. And I've got skin in the game with you.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Right? Because if you're not successful, why would you pay me? Why would you pay me anything more?
Perfect. And that goes to what we were saying earlier in the sense that it takes both sides, or kind of it comes from both directions. So it's really great to see that, you're about that. And, I wish you the best of luck with that program, and definitely recommend anyone check it out, because rarely do you see someone put that guarantee. So definitely something to explore. But on a few other parting notes, I see you have a lot of books behind you. What's your favorite book?
Oh, that's a great question. Other than my own, you mean?
Other than your own. Yeah, you can't be your own.
So at the top of the list is the 4 Agreements,
Mm-hmm.
which we talked about. Then there's another book from a woman who is now, I can call one of my mentors. Her
Mm-hmm.
name is Genevieve Davis. It's called Becoming Magic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about helping your mindset understand that you have the power within you to do whatever it is you want to do in your life. And then one last book, which I recently started talking a lot about, it's called Who Not How. And that's about taking your business to become scalable by recognizing you can't do everything in your business. You
Mm-hmm.
can't say, I wake up in the morning and how do I do this and how do I do that? Instead, you're asking the wrong question. Who can I get to do this for me
Mm-hmm.
in a team atmosphere? Not like, who can I outsource this to, which is what you're going to do, but I want them to be committed to me and I'm committed to them as well.
Got it. Awesome that you're able to read a few, and also you wrote a few. So happy that you have a few books that you like to draw inspiration from. But speaking of mentors, and you just mentioned one of them, but who do you think has been the most influential towards your success, kind of personally and professionally?
Personally, I'd have to say my dad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Looking back now, I wish I took better advantage of his brain
Mm-hmm.
instead of when I was growing up thinking I was smarter than him, when really he was smarter than me.
Mm-hmm.
But as we get older, we realize our parents are smarter than we thought.
Yep.
But that's on a personal level. Religiously, there have been some rabbis who've had a big difference in my life.
Mm-hmm.
But in the business world, Genevieve Davis is someone who I consider a mentor of mine. Another gentleman named is Dr. Obam Bowen, who wrote a book, Today is the Day,
Mm-hmm.
which helped me to continue that mind shift of me saying, I can do whatever I want. I just have to be willing to do it. So,
For
yeah.
sure. Got it. Other than maybe Mashiach, do you have a dream dinner guest?
It's funny. Somebody asked me this question about 6 months ago, and they weren't Jewish. And they said most of those people, most of the non-Jews answer Jesus. Okay. My answer is Yaakov.
Interesting. Why Yaakov?
Because you remember when Yaakov was coming back home after 20 years of being away.
Loosely. I didn't pay that much attention in Hebrew school, so you might have to give me a brief history lesson. But
Okay, so when
I know
Yaakov leaves his father because his father gave him the blessing, and his mother says, "You got to get away from here because your brother's going to kill you."
Mhm.
Esav is going to kill you.
By the way, back then, just to clarify, people now someone's saying like, "Oh, he's going to kill you," in like a way they're going to yell at you. But back then, they literally meant like physically,
He meant he's going to kill you, right? Because he stole the birthright.
Mhm.
He basically stole the birthright, which is if you go deeper, he really did. But in Esau's mind, he did. Right? Even though he bought it from him when they were teenagers, that's a whole nother story. But in his mind, Esau was told by his father, go make me food and I'll bless you.
Mm-hmm.
And Rivka heard this and said, okay, I'm going to get Jacob blessed instead. And they put on this whole ruse and whatever. So he runs away for 20 years. Now he's coming home. God tells him it's time for you to go home. And now he's got 11 children, 4 wives, and he's beyond rich, but he's coming home. And he hears that Esau is on his way with 400 men. He gets a little nervous. There's a lot of underplaying stories, which I won't get into right now. So Jacob starts sending gifts ahead of him, little camps of people ahead of him. This is from your servant Jacob. This is from your servant Jacob. And when Jacob, and Esau meet, by then Esau is overwhelmed. He hugs him and he says, thank you so much. I have a lot. Thank you so much. And his mindset, when he says, I have a lot, Esau, he's saying, I have a lot, but I always want more. I'm in a mindset of lack. And Jacob's answer, Yaakov's answer is, I have everything and God will take care of me. And what he's saying is, I have everything I need. And if I need more, God will help me. So that mindset of lack, I have a lot, and abundance, I have everything. So Jacob would be my who I'd want to have dinner with.
It'd be cool to ask him a few questions, but I think a really valid answer there. On these final 2 notes, you've talked a lot about happiness and kind of overcoming the journey and a lot of the difficulties that you've been through. But right now in your life, what would you say brings you the most happiness?
What brings me the most happiness is when I've cooked a dinner and my family and friends are around me, especially my grandchildren and my wife's nieces and nephews, and my nieces and nephews to that effect, but they were older, my nieces and nephews. And we sit around the table and we enjoy each other's company with my wife and her family and my children and my grandchildren and all these people. And we're just loving each other's company, enjoying the food I made and just enjoying being with everybody.
I think that's beautiful. And definitely the happiest moments I have are those Friday night Shabbat dinners with friends, a little afterward, maybe we're having a little bit of tequila and eating those desserts after a nice Sephardic dinner. So I'll leave it at there.
Next time you're in Brooklyn, Daniel, you're coming to my house for dinner.
I appreciate it. Yeah. Well, we'll definitely have to get that scheduled. We'll chat about that. But on a parting note, Martin, when all is said and done, what do you want to be remembered for?
I want to be remembered as someone who made a difference in the world, in the world in general, in the Jewish world, and in my children's lives by showing them all that you could live incredibly full every day by changing your mindset to be happy and have meaning.
Warren, that's a beautiful way to be remembered, and may God bless you in accomplishing that, and only a happiness ahead. But really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show, my man.
Amen. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure being with you.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Martin Salama. If you enjoyed the episode, rate the show on Spotify, drop a comment on YouTube, and subscribe.